Working.
All right, we're going to start Psachim. We're going to start Psachim this winter. Mirza Hashem. Okay, good evening. We're learning tonight Maseches Eruvin, Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, and as well Daf Tzadi Hey, I should say. We're learning Daf Tzadi Hey and Daf Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph. We'll stop about 2/3 of the way down on Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph. We'll start with some small lingering discussions of Eruv, and then we'll jump into a whole world in the new parak that is unrelated to Eruv. In fact, the first Tosfos on this parak questions why this parak is where it is, Bichlal. We'll get there shortly, but let's first, a few loose ends here, ending the parak of Kol Gagos. We're about a third, almost half the way down on Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, starting with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Im Mutarin. Now, if you were to go back to our Mishnah on Tzadi Dalet Amud Aleph, you'd remember that we spoke about a case where if two walls were to fall down in a particular chatzer or a house, whatever the case may be, so the Tanakama held that it was okay for the rest of that Shabbos, but it would not be okay for future Shabbosim, and Rabbi Yossi would not have it. And in the Mishnah at the bottom of Tzadi Dalet Amud Aleph, and this will be our good entryway, the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, hey, if whatever happened to this chatzer or house, if it's okay for Shabbos, for this Shabbos, it's okay for all Shabboses. And if it's not okay for this Shabbos, then it's not okay for even this Shabbos. Like you can't have this twilight zone, this bein hashmashos of the house or chutzner being good for now, but not for the next Shabbos. And because of that, he argues against the Tanakama. Now, what we don't know, and this is the Gemara's opening question, and now we're back on Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, a third of the way down. Rabbi Yossi Omer Imutarin. Now he framed out two things. He said if it's mutter, it's mutter, and if it's usher, it's usher. But we don't know which one he holds. So that's the Gemara's question. Rabbi Yossi Omer Imutarin Ibaylehu. Rabbi Yossi Le'asor Olahatir. What was his actual opinion? He gave us the Miman of Shach. If it's mutter for the rest of Shabbos, then it's mutter for all Shabbos. If it's usher for the rest of Shabbos, it's usher for. But we don't know what he held. Answers the Gemara. Amar of Sheshes La'asor. He held that it was usher. That, and remember the Ukimtas we learned within Rabbi and Shmuel that you had the corner that took off a part of two walls where they met at a corner. It broke at this corner, so that like there was kind of this opening between the two corners, and that's how we established the case yesterday. Either according to Rabbi and Shmuel, either a slanted roof or the roof that only had 4 tvachim, Achlokas Rav and Shmuel from yesterday. But nevertheless, our Mishnah, in quoting the Shita of Rabbi Yossi, held le'asor, v'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan le'asor, he also held that way. By the way, historically, this Gemara seems very out of order because Rav Sheshes lived after Rabbi Yochanan. So what's with the v'chein? Similarly, it seems to be out of order. It's a little bit strange that it's organized that way. You would have assumed that it would have been earlier and then later, no? I don't know, say like Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Sheshes and Ravina. So now we're saying Rav Sheshes, and by the way, Rabbi Yochanan also. Why do we need two? Why is it backwards? Okay. Either way, both of them can fall back on a brisa. Tanya Nami Hachi, 3 lines above the wide lines, halfway down, Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, we have a brisa to prove the opinions of Rav Sheshes and Rav Yochanan that Rabbi Yossi really intended to be Oser. Tanya Nami Hachi, Amar Rav Yossi, Kishem She'asur and Lasi Lavo, Kachasur Noso Shabbos. And then in our Mishnah, what happens if the walls break in such a way where there's a corner that's broken, so parts of 2 walls are missing? So there, says the Gemara, in the name of a brisa, supporting Rav Sheshes and Rav Yochanan, that Rav Yossi would have been Oser. Very good. How do we paskin? Last of the short lines. Itmar, the Amoraim were dealing with this issue of how do we paskin. Rav Chia bar Rav Yosef Amar Halacha ke Rav Yossi. Rav Chia bar Rav Yosef took the machmir approach to say that if 2 of these walls are broken at a corner, so then we paskin like Rav Yossi l'chumra. Shmuel Amar Halacha ke Rav Yehuda. Shmuel was lenient to say that we allow for these 2 broken walls at a corner to suffice for Shabbos, for the remainder of this Shabbos, but for future Shabbos, and we would have to fix it before we would utilize it again. Asks the Gemara first of the long lines, Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Does Shmuel really paskin like this in our Mishnah? That what? That if 2 walls break, that is sufficient for the rest of Shabbos? How can that be? After all, the Hatnan, we have a Mishnah. And the Mishnah says as follows. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, just as a little bit of background, we discussed this earlier. Do I have to ask your permission in order to make an Eruv? So it depends if it's Zachin La'adam or not. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, B'med Dvarim Amurim. When is one obligated to get rishus from somebody else in order to help them make an Eruv? That's Be'eruv Tchumen, because how do I know that you want to go Mizrach? Maybe you want to go Marav with the Eruv Tchum. I don't know which direction you're planning on walking on Shabbos. So that's where Rabbi Yehuda says that you need to get permission from somebody else. When it comes to Eruv Chatzeros, It's not a question of east or west. It's just a question of can you carry in the Chatzer? And in that case, says Rabbi Yehuda, Me'arvin, Bein Ladas, Bein Shelo Ladas, the Fisha Zachan La'adam Shelo B'fana, Bein Chavan La'adam Ela B'fana. We're halfway down Tzadei Hey Amud Aleph, and Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that when it came to Eruv Chatzeros, you don't need to ask permission. I could make one with for you without your permission because it is considered Zachan La'adam Shelo B'fana. And on that comment, that what? That we only need to get permission by a Ruvei Tchumen, but that we don't need to get permission by Ruvei Chatzeros. V'amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. There we saw that the din taka was like Rabbi Yehuda. Continues the Gemara, continuing the question. We haven't gotten to the end of our question yet. V'lo od ela kol makom sheshina Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin halacha kamoso. Whenever Rabbi Yehuda's din is stated explicitly with his name, we paskin like him. And still further, V'amar le Rav Chana Bagdata, Rav Chana from Baghdad, he said, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, afilu b'mavui shenital koraso o lechayav. Would you even agree that if a mavui was missing its kora or lechi, that you'd also paskin like Rabbi Yehuda? Really? So what does the Gemara say? V'amar le, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says back to Rav Chana Bagdata, V'amar le, be'eruvin amarti lach. No. When does Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel agree with Rabbi Yehuda? That's only true when it comes to Eruvin, but not when it comes to Mechitzos. And if you look in our Mishnah is talking about Mechitzos. So how can you say that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda? Shmuel only holds like Rabbi Yehuda in regards to the status of Eruvin, but not in regards to the status of Mechitzos. So it seems to be a contradiction in terms. You can't say that Rabbi Yehuda or Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah if he only holds like Shmuel in a case where what? In a case where it has to do with mechitzos. He doesn't agree in that case. So answers the Gemara 2 lines before the Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down. So answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Anan, Ledidi mifrashali minei de Shmuel. I have pshat in the shita of Shmuel. How do we understand his shita? Says the Gemara, Kan shenifritz ala Carmelis, Kan shenifritz ala Rishus HaRabim. It depends. When in one case that it were nifritz ala Carmelis, when a Rishus HaRabim opens to a derabanan space, then the halacha would be X. And when the halacha would be nifritz al rishus harabim, then the halacha would be Y. And that is the distinction to be made here. And if you take a look at the last Rashi on the Mishnah, this Rashi is 1/3 of the way down. Rashi, the last one before the new Mishnah, says Dibur Hamaschil nifritz al Carmelis. Rashi says when the Rishus Harabim opens up to a Carmelis, there Shari ke Rabbi Yehuda. That's when Rabbi Yehuda or Shmuel agreed to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah agreed to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara just above on Tzadei Hey Amud Aleph to be lenient. But had it been that it was opening to a Rishus Harabim, then he would hold like Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah and be Machmir. That brings us to the final Mishnah in Perek Kol Gogos, and we are finishing the second to last Perek Baruch Hashem Mir Hashem at right toward the end of Maseches Eruvin. We're almost there. Says the last Mishnah in Perek Kol Gogos. Habone aliyah al gabe shnei batim. Let's say that you and I are neighbors across the street. We build a walking bridge from my roof to your roof. V'chein gisharm hamifulashin. And if you have these types of bridges that underneath it's totally open, so then the din is mitaltalin tachtehen b'shabbos divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that you can carry under these bridges. Now, I can think of a whole bunch of reasons why that's possible. We'll see why in the Gemara. Is it pitikra yored v'sosem? Or no, is that we have 2 houses on each side, and maybe the shnei batim b'shnei tzidei rishus harabim. But then we've had in the Gemara many times. The Gemara is going to debate that. The Chachamim say that you're not allowed to carry under these types of bridges. Not allowed. Another machlokes in our Mishnah. If you have a mavui that's mafulash, we know that the language of mafulash means that it's open at both ends. So you have a mavui, namely there are houses that dump into a chatzer, that dump into this mavui, but this mavui is open at both ends. It's like an alley that's open at both ends. So says the Mishnah, they do not allow it. We're not going to be speaking about that then today. It's not discussed in the Gemara. Amar Rabba says as the Gemara opens, Lo tema, hainu taima Rabbi Yehuda mishum de kasavar beis mechitzos doraisa. I don't want to hear you saying that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah was makil with the bridge, my house and your house are opposite one another, and there's a footbridge. Don't tell me that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter is because the front wall of my house and the front wall of your house is sufficient. Midoraisa. Don't tell me that. Why? Ela mishum. What you should say is the kasavar. Rabbi Yehuda holds pitikr yor v'sosim. So if we have a bridge between my house and your house, well, there are sides of that bridge, and the sides of the bridge drop down. Perfect. Pitikr yor v'sosim, and that's why it works. And says the Gemara, that should be our assumption in our Gemara. The Rabbi Yehuda is saying, don't touch in my shita that I hold that the two walls opposite one another are not midoraisa, but rather that the reason why we can carry under the bridges that are depicted in our Mishnah is because of Pitikr Yord V'Sosim. Says the Gemara, not so sure you can get away with that one. How can you say it's not about Beis Mechitzos Doraisa? If our houses face one another, we're directly across from one another. We've already learned this case. In fact, we've learned it 4 times in the Masechta, as is quoted in the Maseches Hashas here. Take a look at the Gemara's question. Eisive Abaye. Abaye says, hang on one second. You're telling me that Rabbi Yehuda's din is Pitikr Yord V'Sosem? No way. Yes, Al Kain. We've had this many times. If you look up in the Maseches Hashas and count, you'll see that this is the 4th time in this Masechta that we've had it, maybe the 5th already. It's the 4th time in this Masechta. This is number 5. So Abaye says, Yeser al Kain, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mishi yesh lo shnei batim, mishnei tzidei reshus harabim. What happens if we have houses across from one another? No bridge above us, just houses across one another. So then, Osa lechi mikan v'lechi mikan, akor mikan v'kor mikan. All you have to do is put up a lechi or a korah, and then v'nosei v'nosein ba'emtza. So what do we see from here? This is Rabbi Yehuda, the same Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, Rabbi wanted to say that he wasn't talking about the 2 walls that work midoraisa. He was saying it was Pitikr Yord V'Sosem. Really? What about this brisa that we've seen so many times where it says that you can carry in between? There is no Pitikr Yord V'Sosem. Says the Gemara, finishing off the brisa, Amru lo, ein ma'arvin rishus harabim bekach, that you are not allowed to make an eruv that way. So what do we do with our conflict? Our Mishnah seems to say that when you have a bridge, the din is Pitikr Yord V'Sosem. But the brisa seems very clear that the reason why between 2 houses you can carry is because midoraisa, you have 2 houses that are opposite one another. So says the Gemara, Omar le mehahi'in. You're correct that in that case it would imply that way. That case when there's 2 houses opposite one another with no bridge on top of it. However, meha, in our case where we have a bridge on top, leika lemishmamina, you cannot make such an inference. Why not? So let's see if the Gemara brings, well, we don't know why not actually, but the Gemara says you can't make an inference from our case because our case has a footbridge. So it's a little different. You're comparing a case with a footbridge on the top of my house to yours to a case of just my house being opposite yours with no footbridge. So says the Gemara, I can prove that this is correct, that our Mishnah is dealing with Pitikr Yord V'Sosem. How? Amar Ravashi says, Masnisan Nami Deka. Our Mishnah is accurate and we can make the following inference. Midikatani, because our Mishnah says, Ve'od, Amar Rabbi Yehuda ma'arvin b'mavoi hamafulash. If you look at our Mishnah, we see that there's 2 cases. There's the case of the Aliyah, of Shnei Batim, and then the second case was being ma'arvin a mavoi mafulash. So says the Gemara, Amar Ravashi, I know that this is true because it says, Ve'od Amar Rabbi Yehuda ma'arvin b'mavoi mafulash v'chachamim osrim. Now, if you're going to tell me that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that you can carry under the bridges because of Pitikra, then I understand. That's why our Mishnah says Ve'od, and furthermore, because both cases are discussing Pitikra. However, if you were to assume in our Mishnah, in our case where there's a bridge, if you were to then assume that there were Shtei Mechitzos Doraisa, and that's what was the matir, so then why are you saying Ve'od? That's the wrong language because it's the wrong reasoning. The Reish is talking about Shtei Mechitzos Doraisa, and the Seifa is talking about Pitikra. No way. My Ve'od, it can't be. Therefore, Shema Mina, it must be that our Mishnah with the bridge is talking about Pitikra Yord V'Sosem. Baruch Hashem, Hadron Alach Kol Gagos, Hadron Alach Kol Gagos, Hadron Alach Kol Gagos, Yihiratzon. We should come back to this page, 7.5 years. Baruch Hashem, we're starting the final parak. Just a few blot left. If you have yet to sign up for the Siyum, please do so by letting me know. You could Venmo me $20. We're going to have some Givaldic fleish and some other wonderful food as well. The Sechta ends on Daf Kuf Hey. The Siyum and Mirza Hashem will be right after Shir on November the 22nd. The last Amud, the last Daf is Daf Kuf Hey. It will not take us the full time. If you have yet to sign up, please let me know that you're interested. Let's get started. Final parak. A primer for the last parak. We're not talking about Eruvin right now. We're going to talk about tefillin, which is a beautiful mitzvah.
What I've been waiting for.
Yes. It took 95 blot to get it. You're religious about it. It's very good. What?
Just the first Mishnah.
Yeah, the first Mishnah. There are other, and it takes over the first couple of blot. So let's get started because you do have to daven Marv at some point. Says the Gemara as follows. Says the new Mishnah, 2 lines from the bottom, Tzadi Hey Madal, new parak, final parak. Hamotzei tefillin. If a person finds tefillin on Shabbos, machnisan zug zug. You can bring them in one set at a time, namely shel yad shel rosh. Bring it in. Good, but you cannot bring in two at a time. Tosfos, middle of the page. Tosfos dibra hamaschal hamotzei tefillin. Hach pirka b'maseches Shabbos habalei lemisnei gabe hotzos. What is this doing here? Why are you talking about hotzo? We already spoke about that. It's the 39th of the 39 malachos. This does not belong here. This should have been 100 blot ago in another masechta. What is this doing here? So Tosfos gives an answer, 3 lines into that Tosfos. He says, as we'll see, we're dealing with certain inyanim that are connected to carrying on Shabbos with Eruvin. Okay, so that's a very light tethered connection, but nevertheless one that is sufficient. So the Tanakama holds that if you're walking on Shabbos and you see a pair of tefillin that are sitting in a disgraced way, they're strewn about in the alley, which has happened in our community before, where people have to decide what to do. So the halacha is that you put them on with a bracha, without a bracha. We'll see some of the root mar mekomos for that today. The Tanakama holds you can only do one pair of tefillin at a time. Rabbi Gamliel Omer shnaim shnaim. You can do 2 pairs at a time. Already sounding familiar if you've ever seen the Kabbalists. Then sometimes you'll notice that sometimes people wear 2 pairs of tefillin at one time. Is that Bal Tosif? We're going to talk a lot about Bal Tosif today, about the Isser Daraisa of possibly doing additional mitzvos which are not allowed. You're not allowed to have 5 minim of the arba minim. That's an Isser Daraisa. You cannot cut extra corners in your tzitzis. That's Asr. It's Bal Tosif. Well, what about wearing 2 pairs of tefillin? So we'll get into that a little bit today. When do we have a heter, the heter altogether to move tefillin? Biyashanos, that's with tefillin that we know are actually tefillin. What's the language of biyashanos? Rashi, 4 lines from the bottom, Dibur Hamasel biyashanos, shenikar hakesher ha'asui kimin shakai, because there we know that our tefillin have a knot on them, kimin shakai, that are shaped, spelling out certain letters and certain shapes. However, if you have, says the Mishnah, continuing the Mishnah, if you have new tefillin, it doesn't mean new tefillin like we have it, but like not tied yet, it doesn't yet have the level of kedusha, and therefore pater, and in fact usher, you're not allowed to bring in the tefillin, you're not allowed to do that. Take a look at Tosfos, Dibur Hamaschil aval bechadashos pater, iser nami ika, that you're not allowed to. It's not just pater like I don't have to, you're not allowed to. Very good. Let's continue the Mishnah. Mitza'an sevasim o krichos, if you find them all mixed up, all garbled up, we'll discuss this not tonight, but on Shabbos, Emir Hashem, machshech aleinu mevin, you should wait till Shabbos lets out, and then you can bring them back in. Turning to the top of Tzadi Hey Amud Beis, let's continue. Uvisakana says Rashi, she'eno yachol lehamtin sham umisyar mivnei alisim, you can't wait there. So then michsan v'holechlo, then you can just kind of bury them in some material and just kind of let it stay there, and then you can leave them. That's not a problem. If it's a sakana for you to sit and wait throughout Shabbos for the covet of the tefillin, then you can leave as long as you hide them in a meaningful way. Reb Shimon Omer, no sin lechavero v'chavero lechavero. You can take the tefillin and you can pass from one person to the next. Ad shemagia lechatzar achitzon, until you get back to the reservation where you can actually just carry it normally. So the lamdas here, of course, is that there's no akira and hanacha of one person, and it's all totally fine. And then even a child, if a child is born in a place where you're not allowed to carry, so the din is that we pass that baby back person to person without anybody carrying dalan amos. We don't care how far it is. We're mekil. This reminds us, of course, of the sugya of whether or not it's mutter for a husband and wife when the woman is in nida to pass a child from one spouse to another. We know that there is a din called chai noseis atzmo, that a child that is considered alive, it is mutter for a husband and wife to pass that child to one another if the woman is in nida, provided that the child can lean in toward a parent. So these are dinim that are discussed in the postkit, but it's somewhat based on this idea of a chen beno, this child is born passing to one another, afilu hein mei. Last din of the Mishnah, and a din that is difficult to understand. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, even if it's not a baby, even if it's something way less important, you can still use these leniencies. No sein adam chavis lechaveru v'chaveru lechaveru afilu chutz tchum. Wow, you can roll in a barrel of wine from outside the tchum as long as it's going person to person. Okay, maybe not roll, it's actually pass. It has to be no sein. It can't be rolling. Rolling is a problem. Amru lo, they said to him, lo sahalech b'zu yoser miragle ba'aleha. You can't do more than the person who is the baal of the barrel. You should be very limited in that case. Okay, let's dig into some of the lumdas. A beautiful Gemara, a little back and forth, trying to understand what's going on here with our Mishnah. The Tanakama said you're only allowed to bring in one pair of tefillin. Says the Gemara, Zug echad in tefelo. Obviously, the diuk should be made because the Tana Kama was of the opinion that you can only bring in one. And the second sheet in the Gemara in the Mishnah, Rabbi Gamliel says you can bring in two. So obviously the diuk to be made is that the Tana Kama held you can only bring in one. Lema, it must be. Maybe we should say Tanan Stama de lo Reb Meir. Normally we have a rule of Stam Mishnah Reb Meir. Our Tana Kama doesn't have a name, so Stam Mishnah is Reb Meir. But maybe our Mishnah is not like Reb Meir in this case. This Stam Mishnah is not Reb Meir. Why would we assume that our Stam Mishnah is not Reb Meir, the Tana Kama, who says that you can only bring in one pair of tefillin? Because the Ike Reb Meir, if it is in fact like Reb Meir Ha'amar, he's of the opinion, Lo veish kol ma sheyachol lilbosh ve'otev kol ma sheyachol la'atov. Put yourself in as many clothes as you want when you walk out on Shabbos. We don't care how much you wear. And if that's the case, Reb Meir would seemingly then allow more than one pair of tefillin. And if that's true, then our Mishnah can't be like Reb Meir. Says the Gemara, what's the proof to this? That's none. The Mishnah says, "Ulasham motzi kol kli tashmi shovalovesh kol ma sheyachol lilbosh ve'otev kol ma sheyachol la'atov." We see from that Mishnah that Mishnah is saying that a person can wear whatever they need to wear. They can wear as many clothes as they need in order to save all of the clothes. Says the Gemara, "Vahi stama." That Stam Mishnah, Mimai de Reb Meir. How do we know that it's Reb Meir? Because there's a correlating brisa to that Mishnah. Diktani Allah lo ve'shumotziu poshet v'lo ve'shumotziu poshet. Put on the clothes, come out, take them off. Put on the clothes, come out, and take them off. Afilu kol yom kulo divrei Reb Meir. So now we see that there's a sheet of Reb Meir that says you can take the clothes out time after time after time, or wear as much as one time as you can. Yet our Mishnah says in the name of a Stam Mishnah, the Stam Tana Kama, it says there that you're only allowed to bring out one pair of tefillin. Why? It's a stira in Rav Meir. So maybe our Mishnah is not like Rav Meir. So says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down, Tzadi Heim and Beis Amar Rava. Afilu Tema Rav Meir. Our Mishnah could even be like Rav Meir. Hasam, just like over there, Derech Malbusho Kechol Shavye Rabbanan. Just like over there, the rabbi said that the way you deal with clothes during the week, you can deal with it here. Derech Malbusho Kechol Shavye Rabbanan. The same. How do we distinguish between the weekday and the way we use it in the weekday versus how we use it on Shabbos? Hasam, when the clothes where you're saving them from the fire, dibechol kama deboy lavish. You can wear as many layers as you want. When it's cold out, we wear multiple layers. I'm going to wear a sweater when it gets cold out. So kama deboy lavish. When it comes to saving clothes from a fire, you can also wear as many clothes as you want. Hacha by the tefillin. Dibechol nami zug echad in tefillo. But during the week, you only wear one pair of tefillin. So just like during the week, you're allowed to do X, the same thing is what you're allowed to do on Shabbos in order to save them. So that's why we make a distinction. No stira in Rav Meir. When Rav Meir said you're allowed to save a lot of clothes, that's because during the week you can wear a lot of clothes. But during the week, you can only wear one pair of tefillin at a time. So therefore, says Rav Meir, therefore in our Mishnah, he could still be the Stam Mishnah. Therefore, the Stam Tanakam of our Mishnah could be Rav Meir. That brings us to the 2 dots halfway down. And what we've done so far is explained the shita of the Tanakama in our Mishnah to be Rav Meir, that you're only allowed to wear one pair of tefillin. We're going to dig into this more. Let's now try to understand Rabbi Gamliel. Why does Rabbi Gamliel say that it is shnaim, that you're allowed to bring in multiple pairs of tefillin at a time? Says Gemara, Maika Savar. What does Rabbi Gamliel taka hold? What is his opinion about our case? Ikasavar Shabbos is man tefillin who. If he says that you're allowed to wear tefillin on Shabbos, then zugechad in tefillah. If what you're saying is that it's like a regular day, that you can wear tefillin on Sunday and you're chayiv, and you can wear tefillin on Shabbos and you're chayiv. Well, how many pairs of tefillin do we wear at a time? One. So if there is a mitzvah of tefillin on Shabbos, so then you should only be able to wear one, like the Tanakama. V'ikasavar Shabbos lavs man tefillin who. If really Shabbos is not Zman Tefillin, Mishum Hatzalah, and you're only trying to save it, Derech Malbush, Sharle Rabbanan, Afilu Tfei Nami. If what you're saying is that it's not Zman Tefillin, put on as many pairs of Tefillin as you want. Where did you get the number 2 from? Where does that come from? The Tanakama, fine. He says 1, that's normal. 2, what is 2? So it says the Gemara, and this really, really, really gets into the lumdus of why or if people could wear 2 pairs of tefillin. Lo'olam kasavar, really he's of the opinion that Shabbos is lavzman tefillinu. That if in fact you were to put on tefillin, this is how we paskin. We paskin that Shabbos is lavzman tefillin. We'll see later today. It's because it's an os, right? Where it's a famous Gemara because it's an os, and Shabbos is an os. So therefore we don't need to wear tefillin on Shabbos. So it says the Gemara, Lo'olam kasavar, Shabbos lav zman tefillin. Really, Shabbos is not a time for tefillin. It's only the way that you normally wear tefillin, and that has to be in the place of tefillin. So it says the Gemara, what does that mean? Ihachi, if it's just the way you wear tefillin, then zug echad in, we skip the word nami, zug echad in tefillo. If all you're saying is that we're treating it as though you'd wear it like you normally would during the week, then you only get to wear one pair. So where'd you get two pairs from? Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rab Yitzchak, makom yesh berosh, la'aniach bo shtei tefillin. There's enough space on the head to wear two sets of a shell rosh. So says the Gemara, well, okay. Hanicha de rosh. Fine, I got you. On the head, I could understand that there's enough space to put on two tefillin. However, the yad ma'ikal meimar. But on the arm, on the hand, is there really enough space? Says the Gemara, Kid Rav Huna. Because the Amar Rav Huna, Pamim she'adam bamin asada v'chavilaso al rosho. People used to wear their tefillin all day, and they also used to balance things on their head. So he had his tefillin on up here. He's trying to balance something on his head. He's walking. Umisalkan mirosho. And as he was walking, he took it off of his head, the kosher and bizro, and he would tie it on his arm. And he would kind of like hold it with his bicep next to his tefillin. So says the Gemara, well, that case was a b'di'eved scenario. That's not the real deal. Amar de Amar Rav Huna shelo yinayig ben derech bizayon. Well, maybe he just took it off of his head and put it by his arm because it would otherwise be a bizayon to carry it on top of his tefillin. Ra'wi mi Amar, but really, is there enough space? Says the Gemara, we reject Rav Huna's understanding, and therefore we pivot to Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak. Elaked Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, makom yesh berosh sheroi laniach bo shtei tefillin hachanami makom yesh biyad sheroi laniach bo shtei tefillin. We hold that we have enough space on our heads to wear two tefillin, and as well on our biceps to wear two pairs of tefillin. And that is how Rabbi Gamliel got to his answer of two. Remember our Mishnah. Why does Rabbi Gamliel say that you're allowed two? We started out with the question. If you say there's a mitzvah, there should only be one. If you say that there is no mitzvah, you should be able to wear 10 pairs. Who cares? You're not doing a mitzvah anyway. Wear them on your arm. Wear them however you want. Wear them like a scarf. It doesn't make a difference. So he says, no, it has to be at least the capacity of how many you can have. And we know, of course, that you're able to have two. This next Gemara we're going to learn is one of the rayas that's used in Esha Torah for the Torah Shabbal Peh. Because if you look in the Torah, we know the pasuk says, we know the pasuk says that you're supposed to wear tefillin on your hand, literally yodecha, and beinenecha, literally between your eyes, mamish. So it says the Gemara, Tana de Menashe, 12 lines from the bottom of the page, very important Gemara. Tana de Menashe, al yodecha. When the pasuk says al yodecha, zo kibores, that's your bicep. Beinenecha, zekod kod, that's on top of your head, that's above your hairline on your skull. Heicha, how far back does it go? Amrei de Rav Yanai, makom shemocho shel tinok rofes. That's if from the hairline going back toward the center of one's head. Makom shetinok rofes is a soft spot on the top when babies are born. It's called the fontanelle, or loosely called the soft spot. When we take our little kids to the doctors when they're like a year and 2 years old, the doctor will feel to make sure that the skull is closing up properly. So we approximate where that spot is. And in fact, the Bir Halacha goes to town on these tefillin that are very, very, very large, because he says if you're above your hairline, then if the tefillin are too large, you're also by makom mocho shatino grofes. And that means you're not wearing tefillin. The tefillin have to be above the theoretical hairline, where it was if you don't have one, and before the fontanelle.
Second bald joke of the week. Kind of bald spots in fields, bald spots on.
Yeah, the whole parak is against you, Mark. So that's what the Gemara says. So that's why you'll see. That's why you'll see that some people are very makbid to have very small tefillin, and that is a stringency to ensure that they fit above the hairline but before the makom shemocho shel tinok rofes. A very, very important Gemara halacha l'maisa. Ladina, everyone should do this. Everyone should make sure that their tefillin are tight enough that they sit above where their hairline would be and between your eyes but above your hairline. That's the ideal spot. On the arm, when a person makes a 90-degree angle with their arm and a little bit of muscle, you feel where the muscle begins, the tefillin goes right above that spot. Make sure not to go too high. It should be on the bicep, on the kiboris, per this Gemara. And we've probably all seen those pictures, the picture books of how to put on tefillin. You should follow them accordingly. We've also seen people who wear their tefillin hanging very low. They're mamish not yotze. Bracha levatala. They're not yotze the mitzvah saseya of tefillin. You got to find a nice menschlich way to ask them that they should raise their tefillin. All tefillin should be above the hairline.
You see a lot of people in the arm, you're putting it closer, like on the inner part of the arm, so it's like closer to your heart. And there's a lot of picture books that also like.
That's not right.
Right.
In the anatomical position with your palm up like this, and your arm at a right angle, then the tefillin goes here. And then when you put your arm down and turn in, then the tefillin points to your heart.
Sure.
Well, the other arm. Yeah, your
Right.
tefillin point to your heart. That's correct. But it would not be right to put it on the inside.
Right, so
That's
it's
not.
like tucked in.
Yeah. I mean, if you're technically on the kibores, if you're still on the bicep, I guess in theory you're yotze, but that's not the appropriate way to put on tefillin. Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara, we are now 8 lines from the bottom of the page. And now what the Gemara is going to do until we end today, toward the middle of Tzadi Vav and Aleph, the Gemara is going to try and figure out what's the Nekudas HaMachlokas, what are they arguing about? Why is it that they're having a machlokas at all between 1 versus 2? We understand how each one got to their number. That's fine. But what is it? What's the nekudas hamachlokas between them? Let's get started. Lema, maybe we can say 8 lines from the bottom, Tzadi Hamed Beis. Maybe here's what they're arguing about. B'derav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Kamiflage. Maybe they're arguing about how much space there is on the arms and on the head. The Tanakama Lesle, the Tanakama says there isn't space for 2. There's only space for 1, and therefore he only allows 1. The Tanakama Lesle the Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak, and the Rabban Gamliel, who allows 2 pairs of tefillin, Islay the Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak. That could be. Says the Gemara, lo. That's not what the Machlokes is about. The Kule Alma, just go look at the head and measure. This is not some type of theoretical abstract concept. Go look at someone's head and see how many pairs of tefillin you can fit. Why are you saying yes or no? That can't be what the Machlokes is about. Lo. The Kule Alma Islahu the Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak. Everyone agrees to Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak that there's enough space for 2 pairs of tefillin. V'hacha b'Shabbos izman tefillin k'miflagei. Here, the machlokes between the Tanakama, who we now know as Rav Meir, and Rabban Gamliel, the machlokes is about whether or not Shabbos is zman tefillin. The Tanakama savar Shabbos izman tefillin. Shabbos is a time that you can wear tefillin. The Rabban Gamliel savar Shabbos loves zman tefillin. Who? So the Tosfos here points out when the Tanakama says it's zman tefillin. So therefore, you can only wear 1 pair, because if you wear 2, it's baltosiv. So namely, Rab Meir in our Mishnah, where he says 1, according to this explanation, we don't conclude like this, but according to this explanation of the Machlokes, the Mitzias is that Shabbos is Zman Tefillin. So if Shabbos is Zman Tefillin, you can't wear 2 pairs of tefillin at once. It's baltosiv. You're not allowed. Good. And Rabban Gamliel Savar, no, Shabbos is Lav Zman Tefillin. And because Shabbos is not Zman Tefillin, so then don't worry, it's not Baltosif in that case. The Ibai Sema, 2 lines from the bottom. Maybe that's not what they're arguing about. So we thought they were arguing about whether or not there's space for 2, not correct. We thought they were arguing about whether or not Shabbos is Zman Tefillin, also not correct. Says Gemara, Ibai Sema, really maybe the Kuli Alma Shabbos Zman Tefillin. Maybe everyone agrees that Shabbos is a time for tefillin. V'hacha b'mitzvos tzrichos kavana kamiflage. Maybe they're arguing about whether or not you have to have intent in order to be yotze a din doraisa. Let's say I put on my tefillin totally on another planet. I am elsewhere. I made the bracha. I did all 7. I even made it look good, but my brain is nowhere to be found. No kavana, not part of my avodas Hashem, in the clouds. Machlokes if you're yotze. So that's what the Gemara is saying here. Tanakama, where are we? Last line. Tanakama savar. Latzeis ba'i kavana. In order to be yotze, you need to have kavana. Rabban Gamliel savar lo ba'i kavana. Rabban Gamliel was of the opinion that you don't need kavana. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi just across to the left. Dibur hamaschil Rabban Gamliel savar mitzvos ein tzrichos kavana. Hilkach, because you don't need kavana, mitzvah ika baltosif leka. You have kavana for the mitzvah, but there's no baltosif. De ein over al baltosif elam kinis kavin the mitzvah. So if you're able to do a mitzvah without kavana, you cannot trigger baltosif. So that's how Rabban Gamliel gets out of it, and why he says that you're allowed to have 2 pairs of tefillin be brought in at a time. Okay, the ibai sema tzadi vav amid aleph. The ibai sema dekule alma latzeis lo bai kavana. Maybe everyone agrees that you don't need kavana in order to be yotze. Latzeis to be yotze lo bai kavana. The hacha here they're exclusively arguing about one topic. La'avor mishum baltosif kamiflage. They're only talking about violating the Isra of baltosif. How so? 3rd line. The Tanakama savar la'avor mishum baltosif lo bai kavana. To violate the Isra of baltosif, you don't need kavana. So even if I'm blindly putting on my tefillin, if I put on 2 pairs, that's the Isra of baltosif, because you don't need kavana to violate baltosif. The Rabban Gamliel savar la'avor mishum baltosif bai kavana. He says no. Rabban Gamliel says in order to violate baltosif, you need to have kavana. So I just won't have kavana to violate baltosif. And I don't want to be yotze the mitzvah. I just want to bring in the tefillin. Therefore, how many pairs can I bring in? 2. Perfect. Another option, says the Gemara, five lines down, another possibility. Eat the Sviral under Shabbos is Zman Tefillin. Maybe you hold Shabbos as Zman Tefillin. And maybe the Kulei Alma lo lavor by Kavana v'lo latzeis by Kavana. And maybe you don't need Kavana at all in order to be Yotzei the mitzvah or for the Isser of Baal Tosef. V'hacha b'lavor shelo bizmano kamiflagei. Maybe we're talking about being Yotzei, trying to bring this in at a time when it's not Zman Tefillin. That's a whole different discussion, because up until now we've been saying that Shabbos is Zman Tefillin. Let's check this out. Tanakama Savar, that if it's not Zman Tefillin, lo bai kavana, you don't need kavana, and therefore you can violate Baal Tosef, because just putting them on, even without kavana, will trigger Baal Tosef. So therefore I can only wear one pair. Rabbi Gamliel Savar la'avor shelo bizmano bai kavana. If it's going to be shelo bizmano, if it's a time when I'm not allowed to wear tefillin, there's no mitzvah to wear tefillin, then by kavana, to violate the Isser of Baal Tosef, I would have to have kavana. And here I don't intend to have kavana, and therefore there's no problem. But says the Gemara, Ihachi, if it's true that you can violate Baal Tosef without kavana, if that's true, then the Rav Meir, Zug Achas Namilo. Zug Echad Namilo. If you can violate the Isser of Baal Tosef without having any kavana at all, and it's not Zman Tefillin, then Rav Meir's Shita is Maraf Sinigra. Rav Meir's Shita makes no sense, because then you're going to violate Baal Tosef, because it's not Zman Tefillin, and you don't need Kavana to violate Baal Tosef, so you're stuck. The Odin, furthermore, the Gemara says, quoting a Brisa, Hayashen b'shmini b'sukkah yilakeh. A person who sleeps in a sukkah on the 8th day, they get malkos. It's Baal Tosef. That's no longer your makom dira. You're not allowed to sleep there anymore. So if that's true, then you get malkos for the Baal Tosef in this case. So how can you say that, Rav Meir? Therefore, the Gemara rejects this last option. Ella machavarta kiddeshaninan meikara. Rather, machavarta. What is correct is kiddeshaninan meikara, like we answered earlier. Which answer? We said 5 answers. Take a look at Rashi just to our right. Rashi dibur hamaschil machavarta kiddeshaninan meikara. What does the Gemara go back to? So here's what we say. B'Shabbos zman v'lav zman tefillin hi kamiflagei. Really, what Rav Meir and what Rabbi Gamliel are arguing about in our Mishnah is whether or not Shabbos is a zman tefillin. Good. Okay, one last figure for the night. We are a third of the way down. Uman shamas le Shabbos zman tefillin. Who is of the opinion that Shabbos is a zman tefillin? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva. How so? How do we see that it's Rabbi Akiva? The Tanya, the Brisa writes, based on the pasuk v'shamarta sachu kazos l'mo'adam miyamim yamima, a pasuk that's in our tefillin. The pasuk says, "V'shamarta sachu kazos l'mo'ada." You should keep this law for its time, miyamim yamima. And the Gemara says, as a drasha in the Brisa, yamim v'lo leilos, days and not night. Namely, we have a mitzvah to wear tefillin during the day, and we don't have a mitzvah to wear tefillin at night. What does the word yamim mean? The mem, v'lo kol yamim. There are some days as well that also don't have a mitzvah, namely prat l'shavvasos v'yamim tovim divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili.
So if at night during the week you're trying to tefillin, can you put it on?
Well, there's no muksa during the week. It's only can you put it on? Not as it relates to our parak is hamotze tefillin. We're talking about finding tefillin on Shabbos. You're saying in general, can you put on tefillin? So we don't wear tefillin at night. And the post can speak about forgetting whether or not there's a mitzvah, just because a person is more likely to fall asleep. And we have a din by tefillin called guf naki, that a person can't pass gas, you can't fall asleep. Whatever hesach hadas, a whole slew of reasons why we don't wear tefillin at night. So we would not. And if it gets to shkia, you should take them off if you wear them all day. Or if you haven't put them on yet and you're right up against shkia, you should put them on and then take them off by shkia. So all of that, the exclusions of saying that tefillin, there's no mitzvah of tefillin during the day, there's no mitzvah of tefillin on Shabbos and Yontif, all that's Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and says, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Lo nemar chuka zu ela linyan Pesach bilvad. That pasuk is not talking about tefillin. And therefore, there are no exclusions. And therefore, even Shabbos is chayiv in tefillin. Good. Hold on one second. If that's true, says the Gemara, if that's what the pasuk is referring to, well, let's look at the pasuk for a moment. The pasuk said, "V'shamarta sachu kazos." V'shamarta. V'shamarta, as we'll soon see, is a language of lab. When it says v'shamarta, v'shamru v'nei Yisrael es haShabbos, you have to keep Shabbos. If you don't, you get punishments. So let's analyze this. So hold on one second. We have a Mishnah, the Mishnah that is referenced in the very beginning of Krisus, toward the end of that first Mishnah, the very long Mishnah, the first page of Krisus. Titnan, ha-Pesach ve'ha-Mila mitzvahs aseh. We know from that Mishnah that the mitzvah of Pesach and the mitzvah of Bris Milah are two mitzvahs aseh, the only ones that have a chiyuv kares connected to them. Lema delo Rabbi Akiva. Sounds like that Mishnah is not like Rabbi Akiva. What does that mean? He doesn't think that there's a mitzvah say for bris milah for the korban pesach. Of course he does. Di Rabbi Akiva came in the mukila b'pesach lav nami ika. If you're saying that that pasuk is talking about Pesach, that means that in addition to the asay of the korban pesach and bris milah, there's also a lav. How so? Because kid Rabbi Avin Amar Rabbi Loi. The Amar Rabbi Avin Amar Rabbi Loi kol makom shene'emar hishamer pen ve'al eino ela b'lo saseh. When a pasuk has any of these languages, hishamer or pen or al, then we know it's a lo saseh. What's the pasuk that Rabbi Akiva said was talking about Pesach? Vishamarta esachu kazos vishamar. That means that it's not only an asay, it's also a lav. So that means that the Mishnah in Krisus must not be like Rabbi Akiva, because the Mishnah in Krisus says that it's only an asay. But the way Rabbi Akiva understood the Brisa is that the pasuk of Vishamarta Sachuka Azos Adam Mima is talking about Pesach, but it says Vishamarta, which means that there's a lav, which means the Mishnah in Krisus is not like Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, Afilu Tema Rabbi Akiva. Don't worry, all is good. Hishamer de lav lav. Hishamer de asay asay. When we see the word Hishamer that's used in the context of a lav, you're right. That's when it brings about Malkos. But in our context, it's in the context of Pesach, says Rabbi Akiva, and therefore all is well. We treat it as an asay. We're going to stop here, but I just want to highlight that we did answer our question that Shabbos could be still chayiv in the mitzvah of tefillin. A little bit of a cliffhanger, and we'll pick up on Shabbos from right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Donnie.
Shabbos.